Thank you all so much for being here. I know as parents, I'm a parent myself, your kids probably have sports, activities, and you're missing a lot of stuff to be here. So thank you for being here, and to your district for reaching out to have this presentation. I'm gonna cover really important stuff, and I will give you my email if you have questions afterwards, because there's only so much I can cover in the hour time limit that I've been given. But I'm gonna focus on internet safety and human trafficking today. You will see me awkwardly walk over to go to the next slide. I don't have a clicker with me today, but my name is Brooke Tafreshi, as Lisa said. I've been a deputy DA for almost 16 years. Before that, I was a deputy city attorney at the San Diego City Attorney's Office for a little under 2 years, and before that I was a civil lawyer for about a year. In my current position, our district attorney, Summer Stephan, has had myself and 2 others go all across the county in a community partnership prosecutor position. So our goal and our role is to be out in the community, collaborating with community members, with school districts, all with a part of our mission, which is crime prevention. Because of course we're a prosecution agency, of course we protect victims, but our DA a few years ago when she was elected, she was like, I want 3 of you to be out in the community, because I can't be everywhere, but I want to be everywhere. She works really hard. And so, I want you to get out there, do presentations, see what the community needs are. So when school districts such as yours reach out about getting this important information to you, for North County, it's always me. So here we are, so thank you so much for having me. So let's start talking about internet safety and human trafficking. So I will start by talking a little bit about human trafficking and how it interacts with internet safety, and then come back to a little bit more about, because the two go hand in hand. So what is human trafficking? There are 2 types of human trafficking, and it basically occurs when a human is being sold, traded, or exchanged for sex. There's no force or coercion that's required for human trafficking. It doesn't require the victim. Some of you, and when I do these presentations, they see it in the movies and they think that it has to be by force, but that's not a requirement. It's a form of modern day slavery is basically what it is. It's not a choice, and a person can't consent to being sold by someone else. So today, because we're combining this presentation with human trafficking and internet safety, I'm mainly going to talk to you about sex trafficking, although those are both types of human trafficking. So in the United States, stat statistics, there's over 100,000 underage girls and boys that are trafficked into a slavery they cannot escape from. So this, unlike what some people think, this also applies to boys. So it's girls and boys that are being trafficked. Why do sex traffickers focus on the younger victims? Well, the reason they do that and recruit children is because they're more vulnerable than adults. There's a lot that they don't know. Knowledge is power, which is why we're here talking to you about this, and because there's a high demand, unfortunately, for young victims. So the question is always, well, I live in San Diego, I live in North County. This doesn't apply to me. This doesn't happen in San Diego. This doesn't happen in North County. But unfortunately, it does happen in San Diego. So the FBI classified San Diego as a high-intensity child prostitution area. So it happens in San Diego. It's 4th on the list of 13 cities which are top for prostitution of children. Sex trafficking is the 2nd largest underground economy after drug trafficking. And why is that? It's because it's really cheap. So unfortunately, a human can be trafficked over and over and over again. So that is why it's the 2nd largest underground economy after drug trafficking. And unfortunately in San Diego County, and these numbers may change for this year, but in San Diego County there are between 3,000 to 8,000 human trafficking victims per year. So this is something that we do have to think about here in San Diego County. They often experience physical and sexual abuse, but it spans every socioeconomic and family background. So what I want you to take away from this as parents is that this is not something that happens to someone else, because as I'm going to talk to you about, the grooming process, how this starts, is not what you think about from seeing it on the shows and the movies, right? And especially because what is something that we all have, and a lot of our children have? What is it? What's on our phones? The internet, right? And so, and especially our children, where do they do their homework? What do they have access to? It's always the internet, right? So those two go hand in hand. And it could happen across any socioeconomic or family background.
victim is trafficked about 3 years before reaching the attention of law enforcement, because they're in a situation where they're trapped, they can't get out. It starts with a grooming process, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what that means, what signs to look for, and what that looks like. And 100% of schools reported recruitment of their students for sex trafficking. So this happens, I mean, it's not something that is going to be posted anywhere, but this could happen really at any school. So you just want to be aware of what the signs are to look for and what to talk to your kids about. So just some of the terms that you may hear we talk about. So for human trafficking, a pimp is a person who controls and financially benefits from the commercial sexual exploitation of the person. They invest a lot of time. They're very charming usually. It's not, it could be by force, of course, it could be what you see, but it's mostly through grooming and through, charming someone. And they provide a place to stay, they buy gifts, all sorts of expensive things. They'll pay for nails, things that when I talk about signs to look for in a moment, suddenly you see maybe your child's friend or your child and you're like, how are they, it's expensive to get your nails done, right? If I'm not giving them money, how are they doing that every month, right? Or how did they get a Louis Vuitton at this age, right? Or at this stage. So those are some of the things to look for when it comes to that. So just really quickly on this, because this is a question that comes up, pornography is a gateway to human trafficking. About 90% of youth 8 to 16 years old have watched at some point. And when it comes to human trafficking, it's one of the fastest growing businesses online. So what traffickers do is they use the market to traffic victims, and there becomes more of a demand for it. Where does recruitment happen, right? Where does it happen? Does it happen, just strictly at places, that might be considered dangerous? Absolutely not. Trafficking can happen and grooming can happen anywhere. It can happen at any time at schools. It can happen on trolleys, bus stations, neighborhood parks, tattoo parlors, house parties. And I think the biggest one, not just I think, but the biggest one is actually the internet, which I'm going to talk to you a lot more about now. And the concerning part of that is because all of our kids from a very young age have access to the internet, right? And that's great power that we're giving them to be online. And not all of us, looking around, I don't know which generation everyone's from, but many of the parents now were not from a generation where in elementary school, you likely were not doing your homework and everything online. I know I wasn't. So this is something that as parents, we may not be used to. So it's really important for us to understand the power that we're giving our kids, let's say when we get them a cell phone or when we give them the iPad and we just think they're watching YouTube, right? So these are all things that we need to be aware of. All right, who are the victims and what are the risk factors? Of course, anyone can be a victim, but runaways, homeless, foster care, because usually the trafficker is looking for someone who's in a vulnerable situation, right? So if there is someone who, a child who has a deep desire to be loved and is maybe not getting the affection that they want, a trafficker will pick up on that and they'll be the one to provide that affection. There's also a financial aspect of it where, like I said before, the trafficker may buy them, take them to the nail salon or buy them purses or, I'm just throwing one out there, a bunch of Stanleys, that's what the kids are into now. Whatever it might be, they do spend money on them initially in the grooming process. Sometimes those with developmental delays, and certainly middle and high school students can be targets. And it's not just from the trafficker themselves. Sometimes they'll have someone else that they're working with. Let's say they're trying to traffic a vulnerable female. They may have another female that they're working with who's at the party or wherever else it might be, let's say at school, who's looking for those to recruit, right? So it's not just the trafficker themselves. There's different types of traffickers, and I don't have time to get through all the details of each one because I want to talk to you quite a bit about what your kids all do every single day, which is go online or use the computer and the internet. But the different types of traffickers are the Romeo trafficker, those that do it by force, and the CEO trafficker, basically, as we call them. So the Romeo trafficker, they're the ones that are charming, they flatter the person. person. They, they'll look for someone who is maybe more on the naive side, maybe someone who's a runaway. By force, that is the prey for those that are trafficking by force. Could be teens at a party, it could be a mall. I know malls are kind of going away, but there's still some left, right? Social media, and like I said before, females may recruit for a male pimp, so that is possible as well. And all of these intersect with each other as well, but this is just some different styles that the traffickers may use. And the CEO trafficker, that's where it's like, hey, you look really nice. I mean, have you ever thought about going into the acting industry or the modeling industry, right? And that one dates back to many years. I mean, I even remember that type from when I was going through school. But of course, with the internet, that's a lot easier to do for traffickers to try to find people that way. So a couple other things about trafficking, warning signs, things to look for. Let's say you're sitting there and you're like, well, my kids are squared away. Of course, this would never happen to me. Knowledge is power, so having this information for maybe, a best friend of your child, or if you're in education yourself, just some of the warning signs to look for. So dramatic changes in behavior. Of course, this may be attributed to something else, but some of the things generally to look for is fearful, anxious, depressed. They keep going on their phone. For those of you who have older kids who have phones, they're attached to their phone, which I know many kids are attached to their phone anyway, but it's like fear-based, like they keep needing to answer to someone, and you're sitting there thinking, well, what is this about? Another warning sign. Older boyfriend, or calling him daddy, unexplained cash, jewelry, or new clothing, and then branding. I have a couple pictures of branding there. This is something that's a little more obvious, but what human traffickers do is they'll brand their victims. And there's many pictures of it if you look it up online, but I just included two there where you see the barcode and then, of course, the property of the person. That's an obvious sign of branding. But also, if there are multiple cell phones, right? If there are multiple cell phones, you find an extra cell phone that belongs to your child's friend or your child or whomever, what is that for? Where did that come from and what is that about? Because you may be doing a really good job of monitoring their cell phone, but if you suddenly find a second one, where did that come from? So these are all things to think about. And then of course grooming, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about what grooming looks like in a moment. So some additional warning signs, of course some of these you might be thinking, well that's really obvious, but running away from home, sudden drop in grades, huge change in friends and their social circles, new clothes, again goes back to the shopping aspect of it, purses, clothes, things like that. With no financial means to get that. And secrecy with social media is a really, really big one. So, our human trafficking, and of course I gave this away and you all know this, but are human trafficking and being online related in some way? Well, they absolutely are, and that's because child traffickers thrive on using social media. It's a really easy tool for them, right? They could be sitting in the comfort of their own home and looking online to see where they can find someone. And as I'm going to talk to you about in a moment, even if your kids are not at the age where you're allowing them to have social media is, it doesn't just mean, actually I'm going to go over a quiz in just a minute, so let me not give it away before I do that. But social media doesn't just mean Facebook and what you think, it means a lot more than that. Okay, so, the fastest growing crime in the United States is internet crime, and that includes everything from fraud to human trafficking to other scams. And it keeps cutting in and out. I don't know if it's a battery issue, but I can maybe go without for a little bit and then, okay. Oh, that's a lot better. Yeah, so it's the fastest growing crime in the US, and young people are the fastest growing victim pool. And many of this conduct is through social media because it's so easy to access. So when you're looking at children and social media, and these are statistics, and I'll show you all the sources at the end of this presentation. If you're interested in looking at it a little bit deeper, I can also, I don't think it was testing, okay. And I can also provide you more. But in the US, we all know this, 95% of schools are using the internet for school, right? 95% of teens have access to a smartphone. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that's not true. because, you know, so many teens may not have a phone yet, but they also might have access to their parents' phone, right? They have access to their own, their parents, but many teens now do have their own phone. That's kind of become the norm. Over 45 million children ages 10 through 17 use the internet, and we know that, and that's because when their school is online, they're doing their math online, they're doing, you know, everything else online. Of course they have access to the internet. Clever and those other systems that all of our kids use, that's online, so of course they have access. But what about the statistics that relate to what we're talking about right now? So 1 in 5 have been sexually solicited in some way. 1 in 4 have encountered unwanted pornography. And when I say unwanted, it's something that comes up when they are, let's say, maybe they're watching some reels or some, you know, Facebook, not called reels, the other one, TikToks or whatever else it might be. I don't know all the latest lingo, but whatever they might be watching, there might be unwanted pornography that might pop up and they might see. So that's 1 in 4, and close to 60% of teens have received an email or instant message from a stranger and they've communicated back. And how is that? How is that number so high? Well, many of our kids, they play video games. Actually, let me ask you, do any of your kids play video games? Right? I mean, I know mine do as well. So when it comes to video games, there is the chat feature in most video games, right? And so for those of you who maybe don't know, for most of the video games, you can turn the chat feature off. There's no reason that your child should have to chat with some random stranger, right? We're all really good about, you know, no parent would let a random stranger into their house like, hey, come over and start talking to my child. So what's the difference between allowing them to chat with a stranger on a game? Do we even know who's on the other side? Like, let's say they have a picture of, you know, in the chat feature of a video game or a name, you know, Dylan14 or whatever. Do we really know if that's really Dylan14 or it could be some other random person that made a fake profile? So these are all things that as parents, I want you to think about when it comes to what your kids are doing online. So over 75% of internet crimes involving sexual solicitations of children and exposure to unwanted pornography, it's not even reported to police or parents, right? So you as parents, your child who, you know, you're thinking to yourself, because I'm a parent as well, right? You feel good when your child is at home, you're like, okay, you know, we have a safe house, they're at home, they're upstairs, or maybe they're even sitting on the couch near you, right? And if they're on their device, you don't know unless you're monitoring, and I'll talk about some of the monitoring programs at the end of this presentation, but unless you're monitoring, you don't know exactly what they're watching, what is being sent to them, what they're being exposed to. So these are all things that I want you to think about. And I spend a lot of time at the end of this presentation covering tips for parents. So it's not just, this is not meant to be scary. This is just meant to give you knowledge about this stuff, right? Because depending on what line of work you're in, you know, some of you may know a lot more about this technology than even I do. But for some of you who maybe this is not your area of expertise, it's just to give you this knowledge so that you're in a good position to talk to your kids about it. Because most kids, if they have the knowledge, they're not gonna get themselves into a really terrible situation, right? But it's really unfair to give them this huge responsibility of being able to go on the World Wide Web. I mean, you just have the internet without restrictions. They could Google anything, right? That's a big responsibility we're giving them. So giving them the knowledge to go with that and arming them with that power is really, really important as well. So, question for you all, no judgment at all. I'm a busy parent as well, but how many of you have kids who go on the internet for whatever, school, whatever else, right? Do all of you? Does anyone have a child who doesn't go on the internet? Maybe they're younger? Okay. Is it because they're younger or?
6 and 8.
6 and 8? Okay, so they don't have school online yet?
I mean, at school, maybe when they're doing stuff in the classroom.
Okay.
Yes, maybe they're on the internet.
Okay. And then what about, so question for you, what about, like, let's say you're somewhere at a restaurant or something, do they ever like ask to borrow your phone and look up stuff or anything like that? Okay, that's okay. You're saying it. Okay, awesome. So that's great that you have control over that, because
so many kids or so many parents, they supervise what their kids do in every other aspect, right? But supervising on the internet is very overwhelming because, especially for kids who do their homework online and who maybe start to have their own device at home, because for some of the younger kids, their homework is not super difficult just yet. So I have a younger one as well, so they may do it at school. Sometimes the schools will even give them devices to bring home. Of course, there are rules associated with that, and hopefully there's certain things that are blocked, but not always, right? They're not always blocked, and so it's a little scary, and we can chat about that later if you want, but it can be alarming if they're given this device and they don't really, they're not old enough to know how to handle situations that might come up. But as far as supervising children during internet usage, just some statistics here. So 20% of parents do not supervise, and I'll give you all the statistics and where this is all pulled from at the end of this presentation as well. But 20% don't supervise internet usage at all. And it's not because they're bad parents, it's just because they're trusting their kids. And maybe some of them probably don't know that there's so much that you can get into online, right? Because they're trusting, well, my kid's not gonna go on a bad site. But that's not exactly how it works. Your kid, unlike in person, right, before the internet, you're like, well, my kid wouldn't go to that kind of party, right? This is a little different when it comes to the internet because your kid can stumble upon sites without really wanting to go to a site that might be not great for them, or especially when it comes to the grooming process when we're talking about video games and things like that. When they start to chat, it's not something that they think to themselves, I'm going to start chatting with this person and get myself into all sorts of trouble, right? It's just because it's a feature that's allowed in these, and it's not just video games. There's like Words with Friends. I'm just naming some of them. I have no affiliation with any of these different games or anything like that. But there's all sorts of different programs that have a chat feature. If you didn't know this, go home and look at the games that your kids normally play. Of course, we know Fortnite has one, right? We know Roblox has one. But look at some of the other games. I mean, my daughter, who loves gymnastics and soccer, she had downloaded a game, and I check everything. I check, everything goes through me. I get the notification. I have to approve it. Like, they don't just get to put their finger on the device or Face ID and download things. But then I'm looking at this game, and there's a chat feature in a silly gymnastics game. That's not something that, if I didn't have this job or this knowledge, that I would have probably looked into, because it's such an innocent looking game, right? So look into this stuff. See if there are chat features, and so that you can maybe disable the chat features. Now, if your kids, here's just an option, but if your kids are a little older, like teenage years, and they're like, well, all my friends do this, and it's not a big deal, one option that you could maybe consider, of course you know what's best for your family, but I can tell you because I have an older one as well, but one option that you could consider is allowing them to use another device to chat with their friends. So that could be through different programs, like they have Children's Messenger, for example, that's connected to your social media account, and you can approve their friends that are on there, and their faces pop up so you know who your child's chatting with. I'm not giving you the advice to do this, but I'm saying if your kids are at a point where they're like, well, I want to talk to my friends as I'm playing whatever, Roblox or whatever it is, there are ways around it where they don't have to be talking to complete strangers, right? And you can have them chat through other devices, because this is now, for this generation, this is their way of socializing, to some extent. So anyways, there are ways around it that you can consider. So let's talk about social media. Social media is not what I thought when I first heard about social media. It's not just Facebook and Instagram. So we're gonna play a game on what is social media, just a thumbs up and thumbs down. And I think based on what I've already said, you all already know what this is all gonna be, but TikTok, is that social media? Yeah, okay. For those who are watching at home, all thumbs up, we got for that one. Roblox, social media? Yep. So some are saying no, but let me tell you why it is. Because of the chat features. You can be social on there. It doesn't have, social media arguably is not just like, Instagram or Facebook where you post stuff, but where you can communicate with others right? In the broad umbrella of what we're gonna be referring to as social media tonight, video games arguably are part of that as well. How about YouTube? Yeah, yes, getting lots of thumbs up. Gmail. Email, yeah, it's email, and you do get to connect with people, so yes. Fortnite. Yep, yes. Great job, 100%. For those of you at home, they got 100% here. For the most part, we gave some extra credit. So why do we love social media? Do any of you have kids in sports or dance or gymnastics or, okay. Do they have a team account? Okay, yeah. So if you don't have social media, right, and if your kids are older, sometimes they'll want their own account, like they'll want their own account to feature whatever sport it is they're doing. But as a parent, if you don't have social media, then you're not getting to follow on whatever sport that is that your kid is doing, and they're posting pictures, and that is really the way some teens are sharing stuff now, right? So, you know, social media is great for things like that. So that's why we all love it. But what are some of the other things? Well, for those of you with family, you know, out of town, you can share pictures without having to send one to each grandparent. You can just be like, oh, you know, here's the photos from the birthday you missed, or whatever it might be, and it's a great way of sharing things. So there's lots of positives. For kids, you know, for our kids, there is some positive to it too, right? As long as they have the knowledge and the power to know how to handle it and what to do with it. So there's ways that they can give voices to their ideas, increases visibility for some of our young student athletes, right? Because if they're doing amazing in whatever sport it is that they're doing, and they're posting it on their social media, and I'm seeing youth as young as like 9 and 10 with their own sports social media accounts. So, you know, it's, and it says monitored by a parent and all that. So it's happening, right? But there are lots of great things about it. Online shopping, of course, that's a really big one for a lot of us. Lots of positive things about it. But we want to give our kids the tools, if they're using it, on the permanency of it and how to navigate it, right? Because I'm just gonna, a side note on social media, for your kids, even if they're super young, start talking to them now about the permanency of what they do. I know many people, you know, around my age are like, well, I'm so glad there was no social media when I was growing up, right? When they're older, which many of you that have younger kids might not be thinking about this now, but if they post a picture or a friend, I have a story where 8-year-olds went to a friend's house. You know, these are people that I know, went to a friend's house, and the friend who has older brothers was making YouTube videos of them. And apparently the friend had a YouTube channel, and the friend is young, right? That's not something that I would love for my child to be on someone else's YouTube channel doing silly things that 8-year-olds do, but like, I don't want that because it stays on there forever. And who has access to that? Like who monitors that YouTube account to see who else has access to it? Is it public? Is it private? So now as parents, we have to think about, oh, if my child is going to another house, not only do I have to think about, well, who's there? Do I know them? But these are questions that you can, you know, consider asking maybe the other parent or other kids as well. Because for some families, it's the norm, you know, for their child to have their own YouTube account where they post, you know, daily whatever they're doing. Like, this is how I, you know, whatever, do this bracelet craft or whatever. But if you don't want that for your child and they're going over to that friend's house, this is an example, you know, from my own life, then this is something that you should also know about and talk to your kids about and consider. And the permanency of it, right? So if a photo is posted on one of these accounts, even if your child doesn't have one, if a photo is taken and posted, what happens? Do you get to, you know, take that down? And if you do get to take it down, could it live out there forever in some other form or fashion? Especially since a lot of younger people have public accounts, right? Do you want your child's first name, last name to be associated with that? And never mind all the other, which I'd love to talk to you about as much as I can tonight based on the time we have, but never mind all of the other privacy related issues with having your child's information online. I'm just gonna give you one quick example, going off on a tangent, and then I promise I'll get back to my prayer point, but this is really important. So on social media, right, as a parent, if I have a public social media account and I'm saying, oh my gosh, I'm so excited because 8 years ago, my child, first name, middle name, last name, weighed this many ounces, was born, and she completes my life. Now she does, right? However, what have I just done if I have a public social media account? As a well-meaning parent, I have basically put my child's first, middle, last name, okay? I have put their date of birth, because if I'm saying happy birthday to them today, I've basically put their date of birth, and there's all sorts of identity related things that could happen. People could take my child's identity, because now, I just try this at home, right? Find someone that you know of, but you don't know like super well all the information about them. You could Google them, and just with one post, you could see how much information you can find out about them. And it's a little alarming, because not everyone wants to have that sort of, if they want to have that online visibility as adults, fantastic, right? But for our kids, they should have the choice of whether or not they want that online visibility, especially as a parent if you don't want that for your child, but you don't know if they're being posted on someone else's account. So again, this has to be whatever works for each family. That's not for me or our office at all to dictate. This is just a prevention, presentation to give you this knowledge and some things to think about. But had you all thought about some of these things before, or is any of it, okay, awesome. Let's go over some more statistics. So as far as social media platforms, which there's so many more, like every time I update my PowerPoint, new ones pop up that I'm not super familiar with, but 90% of teens use social media platforms. And here's another thing, now it's not just for the sharing of the pictures and all that. One of the things that the teens are loving about social media platforms, let's say for example, I'll just name one, let's say Instagram, is when you click on the little like circle at the bottom left and you get to see random reels that just pop up and they auto-populate based on your interests. And some of those are really funny to people, and some of them are. I mean, I'll admit this, I like them too. But that is another reason why kids are now, really getting into social media. So whereas before, you would think, oh, well, it's a way for them to share with their friends, what they're doing or whatever. Now there's just a bigger world there, right? So that's something for you to consider. 51% report visiting a social media site at least daily. 45% report being online like constantly. It's addictive even for adults, right? But especially for our kids, that's a lot. On average, teens are online almost 9 hours a day, not including time for homework. That's a long time, right? That's a very long time. Especially since if you have a phone, you can be online as you're doing something else, right? Like I have seen teens at the gym with their phone and they're like watching something. And by the way, I've done it as an adult as well, so I'm not knocking it, but they can be watching social media or whatever, and then they're doing their exercise. So they're still online, right? So they're still being exposed to whatever's online, but they can definitely multitask with the phones that we have now that have access to everything. So I talked about some of the risks of social media, but some of the other ones, exposure to harmful, inappropriate content, which we talked about with the human trafficking aspect, pornography, that kind of stuff. But also exposure to dangerous people. I'm going to expand on that a little bit more in a moment. Oversharing personal information. Gave you an example of that with your child's, first name, last name, date of birth, from a very well-meaning parent, or sometimes it could even be a relative. I was doing this presentation and somebody shared with me one time that they were a grandparent, and they didn't realize before why their daughter was so against them posting about their granddaughter. This grandmother was sharing this. And now she was saying she understands because of all the information that's out there. And she was like, I didn't understand why it can't be a public site, because if it's public, then my friends of friends get to see it or whatever. But she finally understood, oh, okay, this sits out there and lives out there forever. And it's not my photos to share, right? So there's a lot where very well-meaning people, our lovely mothers who are grandmothers or fathers who are grandfathers, really want to share this stuff because it's fun for them and it's amazing, but it's just giving them some of this information for them to consider.
So identity theft is a really big one as well. In our office, we do just hour-long trainings on all the scams that are going on online. So, by the way, if you ever had an interest in that, be happy to come back and do that. I was at a Rotary not that long ago talking about some of the scams involving seniors, and we take that so seriously in our office that we have an expert just who handles those types of cases. And within that presentation, there were 2 people who realized they were being scammed, like within the presentation. So that's another danger of social media, that maybe our kids are just too young to really realize what they're getting themselves into. Of course, interfering with sleep, exercise, homework, family activities, and then a potential recruiting ground for human trafficking. So what can we ask our kids? We can sit down with them and we can say, and this is very age specific, because some of your kids might be like, they might be very open to this. Some of them not as much, but you should still try. Sit down with them, like, hey, what is that? What do you do online? Oh, show me this game. I mean, I do this. I honestly could care less about one of these games that my son likes, but I'm like, show me how it works. And just to make sure I'm checking myself that I actually turned off the chat feature. So he's like walking me through it and all that. But the more interest you show, it's exciting for them, right? So they'll sit down and they'll end up opening up to you a lot more than you might think. Remember that our kids are using social media and internet throughout, especially for school and all that, and they're exposed to more than you think. One of the things that I would really recommend talking to them about is what kind of pictures they post. And it's not just what kind of pictures they post, it's what kind of pictures they text as well, which we're gonna talk about sexting in just a moment. So really quickly, NetSmart and some other online resources are amazing. They are amazing. They have lots of great videos that you can use to talk to your kids or to show your kids. So I have them at the end of this presentation, and what I can do is give them to Lisa, because my PowerPoint is too large to share because it has videos in it, but I can make some resource slides to send to Lisa to send to your district. And you're welcome to sit down and look at some of these videos from NetSmart as well as NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have all sorts of resources on there that you can look at. But talking about the risks at every age are important. So for younger kids, of course you're gonna talk about online manners, pop-ups, passwords. I was horrified the first time my son was setting up an account and he was gonna put his first and last name. And I was like, oh no, because everything goes through me. I get notified with everything. I have all the privacy, everything. I mean, he can't breathe without me knowing what's on his device that we just got for him. But he was like, oh mom, here's the username I thought. And it was his first name, last name. And I was like, nope, we're not doing that. So these are things to consider, because you don't want to be identified as your first name, last name as a child on a video game. Why does that need to be there? That's a lot of information to give someone. Pop-ups, passwords, and not trusting everyone you meet online. Of course, with our teens and tweens, cyberbullying is a really big one, sexting, meeting offline. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But that, you're thinking to yourself, well, that's obvious. My child would never want to meet someone offline. But once the grooming process happens, then the child becomes comfortable with that person, because then that person, believe it or not, becomes kind of like a friend, even though you're thinking to yourself, how can they be a friend? You've never even met this person, right? But to that child, it's kind of like a friend relationship if they're chatting with them all the time on their gaming device or whatever it might be. So when you talk to your kids, you ask them, especially some of our teens, look, how could this impact your future? Like, have you thought about that, buddy? And this is from NetSmart. How could this get me into trouble? Would the adults in my life think this is appropriate? Right? So talk to your kids about some of the things that they can consider when they're either posting online or looking at things online. So of course, inappropriate content, and I'll go through this really quickly because I'm running out of time, but it's things that are really obvious, hate speech, threats, things like that. And online privacy, we already talked about what's okay and what's not okay to post. A side note about this, you'll want to check your devices, but this was really interesting when I found out about it. So if you take a picture, the really cool thing that the phone, yes, you're so smart.
So the really cool thing that our phones do that I used to get excited about, because I was like, oh, I can just click on my Photos app and it'll show me all our photos from Hawaii or whatever it is, right? That's geotagging our photos. And so if someone reaches out, and you wanna check your phones because you may have this turned off, or it may not apply. I only have iPhone, but it may not apply all around to the different phones, but I believe it does. So with your device, with your phone, if you take a picture, and let's say, you know, an online predator they're smart enough to not tell your child, hey, send me a picture of yourself without your top or whatever, right? But they're trying to groom them. With the geotag, they literally could say, oh, you got a cat? I have a cat, send me a picture of your cat. And then the geotag of the photo shows the address. Try it on your phone later, okay? And if you want, if you have an iPhone, you can come up and I'll show you. You literally swipe up on your picture and it'll show you the location, and then you click and it'll show you on a map. So then you've just given away your address, right? Another thing to think about, sorry, I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but it was definitely eye-opening when I found out about it. So talk to your kids. It doesn't apply to screenshots. So if I take a picture and I take a screenshot of my picture, right? And I send the screenshot doesn't have the geotag, but the actual picture itself, it does. And you can also, I believe, turn off that feature. So just something for you to know about. And definitely check it out later. If you have any questions, come up and I can show you. All right, so privacy tips. Some of the things for unique passwords, I mean, this is really obvious, but you know, you can tell your kids, hey, don't use the same password for every one of your accounts. For those of you with older kids who are starting to create passwords, but you know, this is my belief, the Padres are the best team in baseball. So they could, you know, put that, the abbreviation or the letters for it, and then FB, like Facebook or Gmail. So these are just some ideas with unique passwords. So risk of sharing personal information, of course we talked about some of this, but identity theft, scams, hacking, sextortion, human trafficking. So I wanna take some time to talk about sexting. And you'll notice I'm talking really fast, but it's because I wanna get through all of this before you leave here tonight. But sexting is basically sending or posting nude or partially nude images. And it's something that when you talk to the school leaders, they'll tell you that sexting is an issue. It happens, right? And so you might be thinking to yourself, I have a good kid, they would never engage in that. But it usually doesn't happen that way. Usually a kid is not going and taking a picture that's inappropriate of another kid to send. Usually it's like someone will send a picture, maybe a girl will send it to her young boyfriend or whatever, and then that gets shared. Oh my gosh, look at what, and then they're sharing. So every time they're sharing, they're also sexting, right? Because if you share that, it doesn't matter that it came to you from her boyfriend. You are also then sexting. So definitely talk to your kids about that. But let's look at why they're sexting, right? They're doing it to be funny, to impress a crush, usually peer pressure, and experimenting with relationships. This is for the victim themselves, the person who is asked to take and send a picture. This applies to boys as well. Please talk to your sons and daughters about this. This is very important. Talk to them about how they do not have to share and should not share a picture of themselves in any way, shape, or form, without clothing, nude, partially nude. That at least if you talk to them about it, right, then they're not going to be so shocked when it happens. Because if they are trying to impress someone and they ask them for this type of picture and they haven't been armed with this power or knowledge, you just never know, right? You never know what they could send. And what did we talk about before? The permanency. Once it's out there, there are sites that will try to help take it down as much as possible, but there's no guarantee. Once it's out there, it lives on whoever's phone it was sent to, lives in their iCloud, right? So once it's out there, it's out there. And it leads to all sorts of shame and embarrassment, humiliation, and just, depression and all sorts of things. So let's look at a photo fate and why you should talk to your kids about sexting. So let me know if this is too loud. This is the video.
You probably get lots of messages every day, but what if you got one like this? What would you do? Would you send a picture? No? way to protect yourself. But what if you'd chosen differently? What if you send the picture? They'd never share it with anyone else, right? Do you want the picture shared with others? Sorry, you no longer have a choice. It's out of your hands now, because sometimes people we trust break that trust. Maybe the person you sent the picture to shows it to some friends. Maybe they send it to a couple friends, who send it to a couple more friends, who, you get the idea. It spreads, and you never know who might see it. Your little brother, your mom, other people at school, even strangers can get a hold of your picture. You never really know where that picture will end up. How long it'll be out there, or what the consequences will be. Don't let others decide what happens to your image. Think before you share. Learn more at netsmarts.org. And hey, if your image is already out there, know that it's not your fault. For information about removing sexual pictures and videos from the internet, visit missingkids.org/gethelpnow.
So that's a great video to, age appropriate, to show your kids or to talk to your kids about, because it usually starts with something like, they're in a relationship or they have a crush and the person, even a friend sometimes is like, oh yeah, I would never share. And then once it's out, you don't know where it goes, especially, I don't know about you all, but I can't keep up with all the storage technology, cloud, this and that. Pictures go everywhere. I don't really know exactly where they go, but talk to your kids about, hey, if you share a picture, don't ever think that picture is private between you and that person, ever. Even if it's, the closest person in your life, it's not private. Once it's out, or please also talk about text messages as well, because once it's out, that's it. You have no control over it. So that's a really good video. And NetSmart has lots of great videos like that, some for parents, some for kids. Of course, we talked about some of the consequences of texting and, staying in control, talking to an adult. This is more for kids to know that if they get themselves in this situation, you want to be really calm with them because they already feel terrible, right? Some kids don't even talk to their parents about it. But if it gets to the point to where they're talking to you about it, they already are feeling all the feels. So you want to be really calm with them as much as you're, anxious on the inside, and just let them know that, there are options. You can file a complaint, tell people it was posted without your consent. Is your explicit content out there? There's organizations that will help take it down, but remember, once it's out there, it's kind of hard to gather it from all the online places. So this is another really quick video that I want to show you.
I can't stop thinking about you. I know you've been waiting for this for a while. I wanted to give you something special. Who are you? Why are you doing this?
Okay, so in this video, this young lady had no idea that Zach was actually not, you saw the picture of Zach. The person that was behind the keyboard was actually not Zach. And I've even talked to my really young kids, when they were younger about this, that when someone is online, just because they post a photo doesn't mean that that could be that person. I give an example. I'm like, look, I could turn around, I could create an account, I could find out what your interests are, right? Your interests are soccer, for example. I could take a photo of someone around your age, and I could put in my profile, let's say it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever the newest one is, and I could put in my profile, oh, I love Real Madrid and I love whoever else, and just going to my game or whatever it might be, and that person lets their guard down and they're like, oh, I'm chatting with someone who has similar interests to me, especially since so many of our youth have their social media profiles public, and they are there to connect, right? Like, as much as some adults want to be private, like mine's on super private settings and I have fake name on there because of my job and other things. So as much as we want to be private, our kids really don't. Like, they are there to connect, and they are looking at the number of friends and the number of likes and all that. So talk to them about that person, like, this video is a really great example. This young lady thought she was chatting with Zach, but she was chatting with, this predator that ended up extorting her. Obviously, this is just a video. This wasn't, but this happens in real cases as well. So it's something for you to talk to your kids about, so that they know that just because something is online doesn't mean that that profile is actually that person. And especially with AI, I mean, this is like levels ahead. AI, and there's voice changing programs. I'm not savvy enough to know who they're through, but there are actually programs where the person can change their voice. There are people that have been scammed for a lot of money and other things based on who they think they're communicating with. People have thought that they're communicating in actual relationships with, let's say, a male for years. I mean, you can even listen to podcasts about this. This is a real thing based on the person's voice. They're like, yeah, but I talked to him and his voice was this. And it's these different programs that they use. So there's a lot out there. Technology is amazing in so many ways, but they're always one step ahead. And it can also be, something that if it gets in the wrong hands, it could be used for not great reasons. So as parents, as long as you have this knowledge, then you're in a good position to talk to your kids about it. So a couple of other things I want to talk to you about. This is a great example. When you talk to your kids, are they really talking to the kids around their age to the left and the right of their screen, or are they talking to the others who were actually pretending to be them, right? You just never know. Of course, sexting is a forever mistake because we don't know where that photo could end up, even if they have it taken down. Of course, yes, criminal charges for child porn are possible. Traffickers, they could get the sexting picture in their hands. They never go away. And like we talked about before, the social embarrassment, the depression, and things that come along with it too. So let's see, let me talk to you a little bit about grooming, because it applies in many of these different things that I talked to you about. It applies in human trafficking, it applies in sexting, really any type of like peer pressure type of situation that your kids can be in. So when it comes to grooming, unlike what we all have seen in the movies from before, usually in these situations, it's not someone that's coming and being like, give me your picture or else I'm gonna do this. They don't come out that forceful, whether it's in a sexting or human trafficking or another situation, or even in a financial fraud situation. So this applies to adults as well. They see what you've put out there on social media, or maybe as parents you've put out there about your kids, what are some of the things you're into that you like? And then they might use that to start grooming you based on some of the likes that you have. Or if it's in a school context, like not even online, they might groom a vulnerable victim based on, buying gifts. But it usually doesn't start out as this like super aggressive negative thing. It turns into that, like that sexting video you saw where she's like, Zach, why are you doing this? Well, it didn't start that way, right? It started out as what she thought was a relationship with this young man. So grooming can be in any way, shape, or form, but it's usually something to make the person feel good and to let their guard down, which with our kids, because they're kids and their brains aren't fully developed, right? They could be groomed in different ways if we don't talk to them and if we're not aware of what they're doing online. Okay, so I want to talk to you about emojis because there's more as parents that we have to think about, and I'm always following up on this stuff because I want to make sure that, and it's not just through phones, because emojis can be, through email and things like that as well. So what do they mean? Innocent emojis for your teenagers, or someone could be, so if you're sitting there and you're like, my teenage would absolutely never do any of the things you're talking about and you've lost your mind. That's possible, but it could be stuff that someone else is sending them. So I still want you to have this information and this knowledge. So what are some innocent emojis that teenagers could be using? So take a look. I'll just let you see. See that? Okay. So these look very innocent, right? Creative, very innocent, but look at what they could mean, okay? And I'll send this to Lisa as well, okay? And there's more. This is from a site called Gab, but there's texts with their meaning. So sexting texts with what their meanings are. So look at the bottom, Netflix and chill and, have oral sex. I mean, if you saw those emojis, you probably I wouldn't think twice about it, but for having this information, right? So it's not like before where kids are like, well, I'm gonna go and do this. Do you want to go and do this? They're using emojis, right? They're many steps ahead. So take a look at this. A lot of these things you can find online as well, and I'll make sure to send you, but they're pretty smart. So if someone is trying to communicate with your child in a way, by the way, if you get your child a phone, I can't tell you what to do, but absolutely you have a right to check their phones. You do, you're the one, are they the ones paying for it? No, you're paying for it. So you could have a contract with them ahead of time, which is what we did with our son when, of course he was the last one. Mom, I'm the last one to get a phone. Everybody has a phone. I'm like, remember, don't compare yourself. But when we finally got him a phone, we signed a contract with him. These are the rules. We can check your phone anytime we want, which I do basically every night, and this is how it's gonna be so that they don't later turn around. And I have an example of a contract that's on our site. It's one that's on the DA's office website that I can send you all as well. But you can be like, look, if we get this, these are gonna be the terms because you're paying for it. So you don't have to be in a situation where you're like, well, I'm not allowed to check my kid's phone. You definitely should have access to see what it is that they're doing and who they're chatting with. And when you check phones, make sure you go all the way. So on your, let's say your iPhone, right? You see a bunch of the apps, keep scrolling, because some of them hide stuff like 5 pages over after it's blank. So it'll be like stuff, blank, and then it's at the end. So look for those apps too, all right? Let's look at secret texting codes as well, because why not? Sorry, 1 second. Here's some secret texting codes. There's probably way more than this, but here's some. Okay. And we talked about some of these tips. Privacy settings are a really big one. It's frustrating because even with adults with our social media accounts, it's crazy. They'll come out with some update and then you no longer have your same privacy settings you did. I'm even overwhelmed with that, right? So check privacy settings of your kids' accounts because remember you should have access to what they're doing. So if it's video gaming and if in your family you don't want them to chat with random people that are online, which is a good idea, then check those settings. Turn off the chat feature, check privacy settings of their accounts. Because usually if you're creating an account, it's not super obvious what the privacy settings are gonna be in my experience. It's just my opinion and my experience, right? So make sure you check that to make sure that the privacy settings are what you want it to be. So don't just assume that it's going to be private. And I know we're pretty much out of time. A couple of other things, tips for parents. Put your computer in a common area of the house, right? So if you put a computer in your child's room, for those of you with older kids, you don't know if when you go to bed, especially when your kids are a little bit older, if they're just gonna go on the computer, right? And then that opens up a whole world to them. By the way, something we didn't even talk about tonight is bullying, because there's just so much to talk about, But unfortunately, even bullying is not like it used to be without all this technology, because now, guess what? There is a literal pocket bully who can bully your child 24/7. Whereas before, if you went through the harsh middle school years like we all did, and you know, and then you leave school, you're in the safety of your home. Now, when our kids are at home, if they have their devices, whether it's just the computer or their phone, you know, that information that bully could keep continuing to bully your child through whatever site they're using. And there's all sorts of different ones now that are really disturbing, where one is, I don't remember what it's called, but the whole point of it is to say negative things about someone, you know, and I'll remember what it's called hopefully by the end of this presentation. But there's ones that come out that are like, that you can freely say things about people, and the whole goal of it is to say negative things and see if people can stand it. It's disturbing. Or on social media, or in chat features. You know, there's so many different ways now with a device that your child can continue to face that. And are you trying to tell me that if a computer is in their room and something pops up that they have a message, they're not going to check it? As an adult, we would, right? So just consider having their computer in a common area of the house, because odds are, if they know you can see their screen, they will be less likely to be getting into certain situations. Educate yourself about computers and the internet. I cannot stress this enough. It is super overwhelming because there's so much information, especially if you don't have a tech background. But educate yourself about that. Spend time with your kids online. I already talked to you about this. The more interest you show them, the more willing they're going to open up to you. Bless you. Make reasonable rules and set times and use limits. We have use limits on our child's accounts, and so they just, within that time period, they just shut off. So you can do that on your devices as well. Educate yourself about the dangers of the internet, which is what you're doing here tonight. So instead of being at home with your kids or at sports or wherever, you're doing exactly that tonight. Don't allow them to go into private chat rooms. Reinforce the don't talk to strangers rules when it comes to talking to strangers online as well. Put accounts in your name and know your child's password. Have a list of all the passwords, and you can have auto notifications on their accounts. I know because I do, where anytime they try to open an account or do something different to their account, it notifies you. So you have to approve it before they do. Never allow them to meet face to face, and don't give out personal information of your child on the internet. So there's a lot. Last, I'm just going to tell you about, because people always ask, well, has this really even happened with the gaming situation? And in San Diego County, you can look this up, it's online as well, but in National City, there was a case a few years back in 2021 where the news covered it, and it highlighted the growing role of gaming apps in child exploitation. So there was a young lady who, and I'm just telling you what's already online, so nothing outside of that, but young lady who was communicating with a person who was a 25-year-old that they had met online, and the parents actually knew about it, so took the device out of her room, and the child found an old device and communicated with the 25-year-old via the chat feature of Roblox, because it has a chat feature, and was taken from the house or left the house. And anyway, she ended up returning to her family, but keep gaming chat features or features generally in mind. But no, because I know this comes up sometimes in presentations, like, well, has this happened in San Diego County? You can Google it, and online you can find more information about this and other cases nationally as well. So really quickly, last one, programs that allow, we're not affiliated with any of these programs, okay? So we don't endorse them, we're not affiliated, and there may even be more than this, but these are just some of them that are online that you can monitor your child's online activity. So take a look at that. If you want to take a picture, feel free, and then I will hand this back over to Lisa. Thank you.
Can we give Brooke a hand? Thank you so much. I learned something new again. I never knew about geotagging photos. That is scary and new information. And the list of emojis has grown since the last time I can submit as well. Definitely a lot of scary statistics and stats. It's always good to be armed with information. Just for you to know, we use Bark as a district, so we get alerted every single time there is any concerning things happening on our internet. We do have heavy filters with our devices. We do have 2 offerings for our students for internet safety, one for the primary grades and one for the upper grades that all students take. One general for the district and one offered through the STEM enrichment class for one class that they take, but Our district does use BARC as well, so we try to do our best to do best we can to monitor, but as we know, it's constantly changing and evolving. I hope that this was helpful and informative. I know that Brooke's next session with us will be at Parkdale Lane Elementary on October 2nd, talking about fentanyl and vaping, which is another hot topic as well. So thank you for being here with us tonight. Do you guys have any questions or anything for Brooke? I know she'll be here for